Hello again, my name's John. I'm a retired chef from the northeast of England in the UK, and welcome to another one of my recipes. And this is another one of our customers' favourites, and it's this fantastic apple pie recipe. I'm calling this part 1 as I'll be making this homemade egg and vanilla custard in a follow-up video. And here's a list of the ingredients needed if you want to have a go at making it yourself. The first list is for the pie filling, and the second list is for this wonderful buttery pastry. Right, I'll begin the recipe by prepping a couple of things, starting with greasing the pie dish that I'll be using. The dimensions of the dish are on screen. I'm using lard to grease mine, but you can use vegetable shortening or butter, it's up to you. And the next job is to juice half a lemon. This is to pour over the apples when they've been peeled and chopped to prevent them from discolouring. Now you can use whatever variety of apples you prefer. I'm using 1.4 kilograms, that's just over 3 pounds of these Braeburns. They're not too sweet or too tart and they hold their shape during the cooking process. I'll get going by peeling and chopping them into chunks as shown in the video. Whichever way you peel and chop your apples, make sure you get all the skin off and all the bits of core out. Try to do this as quickly as possible to minimise the enzymatic browning triggered when the flesh is exposed to oxygen. That's where the lemon juice comes into it, as it slows this process down. Pineapple juice will also work. Whatever you use, make sure the apple chunks get a good coating of it. At this point you can add the spices, which for this recipe is 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon and a half teaspoon of ground nutmeg. Now I'll be using my cinnamon and nutmeg spice mix. It's fantastic for all sorts of recipes. If you want to know how it's made, the recipe is on my apple sponge video. I'll leave a link in the description box below. The next ingredient is 40 grams, that's 1.5 ounces of brown sugar. I'm using this Demerara sugar, and through experience I know 2 heaped dessert spoons is the right amount. Now give that a good mix, and the best way is to get your hands into it. Once it's had a thorough mix, cover the bowl and let it sit for about an hour or so. You want as much juice to seep out of the apples as possible. By doing this, the apples won't shrink as much in the oven, and the juice that's seeped out of the apples will be thickened to a caramel consistency and put back into the apple filling. But you'll see how that's done a little later in the video. Now onto the pastry for this pie. I'll be making this buttercrust pastry in my food processor, but if you want to make the pastry by hand, check out my chicken pie video. I'll leave a link in the description box below so you can find it easily. Making the pastry in one of these machines is not only quicker and easier, but it's much better as it keeps everything cold, which is what you want when making pastry. And if you are making the pastry by hand, make sure your hands are cold and you do it as quickly as possible. Right, that's the flour, sugar and salt in the machine. I'll give that a quick burst to mix it all together. Next I'll add the cold butter, then pulse the ingredients until they resemble fine breadcrumbs. And once again, if you want to make this pastry by hand, check out my chicken pie video. I'll leave a link in the description box below. The last ingredient is the 100 ml of cold water, and I'll let the machine go. Once the pastry begins riding around the mixer, it's done. I'll do this in real time so you can see exactly how long it takes. And that's it done. Don't overmix it. Now I'll separate the dough into 2 equal pieces, then wrap them in cling film and get them into the fridge for at least 30 minutes. Time it so the apples and the pastry are ready to start assembly around the same time. Okay, my apples have been sitting in the bowl for an hour and the pastry has been in the fridge for the last 30 minutes. So it's time to put this apple pie together. I'll start by pouring the apples into a strainer and let the liquid run through into a separate bowl. And as you can see, they've released some of their juices. This sweet, spicy apple juice is incredibly tasty and you don't want to waste a drop of it. So what I do is make it even richer by adding 40 grams, so that's 1.5 ounces of butter, and get it into the microwave for 30 seconds on full power, just until the butter melts. And while that's doing, I'll mix up 2 teaspoons, that's 12 grams of corn flour. You may know that as corn starch, into 40 ml of cold water. Next, add the corn flour mixture to the apple juice and microwave again in 30-second intervals until the mixture thickens as shown in the video. And that's exactly the consistency I'm looking for. Then simply mix this fantastic thick, sweet and spicy apple sauce back into the apples. And how easy was that? And it makes a fantastic difference to the filling for this pie. Now I'll thoroughly mix that in and set it aside while I get started on the pastry. Just before you start rolling the pastry, preheat your oven to 200 degrees Celsius, that's 392 Fahrenheit or gas mark 6. I'm setting mine to 180 Celsius as my oven's fan assisted and it runs about 20 degrees hotter than indicated on the dial. Time to start rolling the pastry. First thing to do is dust the bench and the pin with flour. If you're not familiar with rolling pastry, this is something you need to practice at to get a feel for it. The only thing I'll suggest is roll backwards and forwards in straight lines and turn the pastry 90 degrees. Once the pastry becomes too big to turn, then turn the pin 90 degrees. That should keep the pastry reasonably round. If your rolling pin starts sticking to the pastry like this, just add a little more flour to the pastry and the pin. It won't do it any harm. Once it's big enough, simply roll up the pastry onto the pin and unroll it into the dish. Now gently press it down into the pie dish, making sure you get all of the air bubbles out. Then to stop the bottom of the pastry from lifting up in the oven, prick the whole area with the fork as shown. Now set that aside while you roll out the pastry for the top of the pie. Then roll that onto the pin and set that aside while we have a bit of a clean up. Then I'll start to fill the pie. When you put the apple chunks into the dish, try to pack in as much as you can by not having spaces in between the pieces of apple. That way the finished pie won't shrink as much during baking. Next, brush water around the edge of the pastry. This is the glue that sticks the top to the bottom. Then line up the pin and unroll the pastry over the top. Then with the palm of your hand gently press all around the edges of the dish. Now there's lots of ways of crimping the edges of the pastry. I go into a bit more detail in my chicken pie video, but I just use my 4 fingers and thumbs to do mine. Another good way is to use the tip of a fork by pressing all around the edge. Once crimped, cut off the excess pastry with a dull knife. Note I'm using the back of the blade because I don't want to damage the edge of my pie dish. Once the excess has been cut off, I like to pull back the pastry from the edge of the dish. It makes it a little easier to get the cake slice under when serving. Now all there is to do is brush with beaten egg. You can use milk to do this, but egg gives a better shine to the finished pie. Now cut a couple of vent holes and sprinkle a teaspoon of sugar all over the surface of the pie and get it into the preheated oven and set your timer for 45 minutes. There shouldn't be, but just in case there's any leakage from the pie, I'm baking mine on a baking tray. And there it is, one beautifully golden brown apple pie. Now I'll get it onto a rack and let it cool down some before I cut a slice and let you have a look at what it's like on the inside. Right, it's about 30 minutes later and it's cool enough to try. The aromas in my kitchen is amazing. There's not much better than the smell of spiced apples cooking. And how nice does that look? There's not much shrinkage and that rich butter crust pastry is just the right thickness. Now I'll pour a ladle of this fantastic homemade egg and vanilla custard over it and give it a try. I'll be showing how I make this custard in the very next video. And it's absolutely delicious. The apple is not too sweet or too moist, with just the right amount of spices, and that pastry is wonderful. The edge crust has a biscuit or cookie texture and an amazing sweet buttery flavour. I really hope you try it. It's cheap, delicious and not too difficult to make, and you'll give it the thumbs up too. Don't forget to watch the custard video up next. Well, thank you again for watching. Please like, share, comment and subscribe by hitting the circle above. If you do subscribe, activate the bell icon next to the subscribe button on my channel page. And by doing that, you'll be automatically notified every time I upload a new video. And in the meantime, here's a few of my other videos and playlists that you may want to watch. So, until the next time, be safe in the kitchen and bye for now.